A warm welcome to Jeremy, Thom, and Bernice, who are our panel members. And when I was reading through all of their profiles, I'm thrilled to even just spend an hour with you getting to hear your... And what I did when structuring this session a little bit, it's such a huge topic. We could talk all day, like Thom said, and you could have an entire conference just on the topic of the future of work. So what I did is I structured it around thinking there's themes, and looking at your LinkedIn profiles, I was looking at Jeremy's, and I think education and lifelong learning really came through on his. And when looking at the future of work, education and being on top of upskilling is extremely important. So Jeremy, I was thinking education and lifelong learning really aligns with what you're doing. Thom, location and community building. Really also, you know, where do you work and how do you work in a community and how do you make use of that community? Bernice, I was looking at diversity and distribution. So with work, I mean, a lot of people in the past would talk about making money, but these days it's not so much always about making money. It's about lifestyle and including diversity and distributing the wealth. And of course, that's just one aspect. And for myself, I love connecting and communicating. So I kind of thought those were maybe a few themes that you need to think about with the future of work. All of them cross over. And of course, we'll hear more from you. But if you are in this session today, I'd love for you to add what you think on those topics or on anything that's relevant to the future of work. So what I'll do is I'll ask each of the panel members to give a bit of an introduction. I see, I'll start in my screen. Thom is on the top right-hand corner, so I'll jump to him first. But I see that Thom is at StartDoc in Amsterdam and also based in Rotterdam. So I'd love to hear more from Thom about what he does and about maybe the theme of location and communities. And then I'll come to Jeremy and Bernice. And if each of us just do a few minutes introduction, and then I've got a few questions and we'll ask the audience questions as well. So over to you, Thom. So the future of work.
Yeah, thank you for your introduction, Renee, and welcome all to all the participants of the online event. Yeah, indeed, the short introduction was already on point. But I'm the CEO and co-founder of Startup Co-working. Co-working means working together with all kinds of people and entrepreneurs on a location and building a community. So we have 3 of these locations, 2 in Amsterdam and 1 in Rotterdam. I started this company 5 years ago because we thought there was a need to facilitate the future of work. Actually is bringing people together in beautiful buildings. So they're all monumental buildings. And we make sure these people have the ability to work there, but also to share knowledge, network, and expertise with each other. So we actually create co-working communities, so an ecosystem actually where people can plug in, work, and meet other inspiring people right around them in order to grow faster. So I think there's a lot of overlap there with both the other. So we a lot with learning and with facilitating knowledge for the people within our buildings. And of course, the inclusivity part that Bernice is doing. This is also very important for a co-working community as a whole, I would say.
Great, thank you. So, and on my bottom left of my screen is Bernice. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about if you'd like to talk to the topics of diversity and distribution, or a little bit about yourself and why the future of work is important to you.
Yes, so very happy to be here as well. And yeah, like you said, the future of work is such a broad topic. But for me, creating an inclusive company culture is basically the foundation for the future of work, right? Everybody right now is talking about, are we including everybody? Do we have equity and opportunity? Are we excluding? All stuff like that. And that's what I work on with my company. And for me, the basis of really creating an inclusive company culture lies within creating an environment where there is constructive communication, there is psychological safety, so people feel safe and they feel like they belong, and genuine connection. And to create that, for me, the basis is that we need to be able to really have conversations that we might find uncomfortable, but we are willing to have those conversations because we need, on the other end of that conversation will be a space where we all feel that our potential is being used and that we can share our unique perspective, and we can get to that place of creativity, innovation, and being your unique self, basically. So yeah, I think all those things are important when looking at the future of work, when we are distributed all over the place, especially now in COVID times, people are staying at home. How do we stay connected? How do we communicate? Do we make sure that everybody is still included, even from home? People feel disconnected because they're not in an office space, so to speak. So all those things are talking to how are we moving forward and how are we creating an environment where everybody can live up to their full potential.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I love that about the potential. Thank you, Bernice. And Jeremy's coffee might have kicked in now. 7 a.m. Just 7:10.
I threw in coffee. I threw in some chai. I'm kind of putting in anything I can to dirty chai.
I've heard about your company Dream See Do through Lana, and it's been on my radar for a long time actually to find out more about it, because education is also my field. I'll introduce myself more at the end, but I'd love to hear more about your vision of the future of work.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to be here with this crew and this group. I definitely have an affinity for both co-working communities, Thom, and for inclusivity, diversity in the workforce, and just in general, Renée. So I'm really pleased to be sharing this panel. It's quite lovely. Popped through a lot of different co-working spaces myself in New York City and around, and I feel like the best spaces are those that sort of to converge the two sort of introductions that are those that are inclusive, that are diverse, that have different viewpoints. So it's really exciting. In terms of Dream See Do, I co-founded it 7 years ago. My co-founder Josh and I actually started in high schools in the United States to kind of reimagine sort of the education to career pathway. And what we saw at the time, we actually participated in a hackathon. Most of you probably know what a hackathon is. You basically build a product at a weekend. I think this conference is not really new to folks, but and it was a social good conference called The Feast, where it just sort of brought people from all over the world, actually. The woman who founded it is fantastic, and Josh and I later on said it's like her own personal dinner. It's like she knew every one of these connector people. If you ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, you'll know what I'm talking about. So she's one of those folks. But it was really great, and we got together around kind of the career, the education and career pathway, and the disconnect that happens in the classroom. So I remember the deck we had 7 years ago that weekend, where there was a picture of someone kind of teaching the classroom in a big X, and then the globe. There's such a disconnect between what young people experience and learn in the classroom and what they might be in their lives. And I remember this as a young person, being a musician and kind of thinking, oh, well, this is my path, and I really just want to be a famous musician. And I actually had an offer in high school to sign a development deal with a major manager at the time in music. And I was a senior in high school, and not really something to do to kind of quit school at the time, and when you're about to graduate and go to college. So I ended up making the decision not to do that. And early days, I spoke to young people about that decision and going to college and all the sort of the meanderings my career took. And ultimately, when I met Josh, we had a lot of ideas around unlocking human potential. I've been a mentor, a coach in my life. Even my mom reminded me I was a peer counselor in high school. So I've been doing this my whole career. And so as you said, lifelong learning was really, really powerful part of my experience. Part of my path took me through doing digital transformation at some of the largest library systems in the world, holistic retreat centers. I do yoga and meditation. And so I had a depth and breadth of experience such that when I started Dream See Do, we really wanted to reimagine what education could be. And at the time it started in high school, but ultimately we also added sort of adult learning a couple years into the business. And the idea is that what we saw in the market was that online education, though the advent of that in like 97 with Blackboard, let's say, was very powerful, it's remained vastly passive. And you know, we said that sort of like the humanity had been ripped out of education with online tools versus kind of giving proxies for motivation, mutual support, deep community, and all the things that allow you to practice and reflect in learning. So GMCD really is about, our 3 verticals are deeply in education. We do teacher training as well, and professional training, which, you know, runs a pretty large gamut. But ultimately for us, our core obsession has been around creating real deep community learning, motivation, and ways for practice and reflection in the learning experience. And it's been, COVID actually has been quite crazy for us because we already were growing quite a bit. You know, we have bootstrapped the company. So one thing that I wanted to share about the future of work is creating a new model for business. Like, you don't have to be a unicorn. In fact, I don't believe that that's something that's real. I think that sort of the VC mechanism, at least in the United States, and the way funding happens vastly is around sort of just getting to the next monetary level and getting as many eyeballs as possible versus actually creating something of value. And so for me, creating a business of true value that's going to help humanity is like the most important thing that I can talk about today. So happy to be here and happy to come answer any questions and talk more about that.
Interesting. And it's great because this is the first time that all of us have also met online, but it's great to hear that we're very much aligned. And that's what I love about conferences like this. I was at the live one in Amsterdam last year, and I've known Lana and Veronica for a little while. And when I heard it was going to be online, I was a little like, oh, and a screen again. And I love screens, but it's great that we have the ability to hook in with people from all around the world. And something that's interesting that's affected work in the last 6 months since the COVID happened is it's happened all around the world that we have to become comfortable with technology. So for many years, I've been a bit of an advocate. You can probably hear from my accent, I'm not originally Dutch. I come from Australia. So I grew up in a small country town in the middle of nowhere in Queensland, just north of Brisbane. And the future of work for me then was very limited because I lived in a country farming town. There were next to no jobs. Even with education, Australia has been quite a long way ahead in digital learning because you can't demand that people turn up because our population is so spread out. So I did my entire Bachelor of Business online, and I did my master's thesis a few years ago on e-learning and digital learning. And ironically, I was somebody that was already campaigning at my current job. I've been for 5 years at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And I've been campaigning for people to use Microsoft Teams and to do online learning. And we've got Blackboard, which you mentioned, but it's really getting outdated. And it's very, very hard for universities to keep up and educate people for future jobs, when even my job as a social media teacher at a university didn't even exist when I was at school. So the speed is something that I've noticed as well. So
yeah, Renée, I would just quickly add, I think I might have been to your town, by the way. I spent time in uni in Australia a long time ago, but I would just quickly add that, yes, I think that the main issue I see is that instead of creating an environment rife with innovation, often the large companies just put their dollars into marketing and sales just to get as many people on board as possible. And I'm hopeful, and I'm seeing that with our company, but I'm, in a microcosm, but I'm hopeful that across all the work we do, that COVID has opened up opportunities that showcase the best of humanity in digital, because it's not everything, obviously, but there's a lot you can do that's pretty powerful. I mean, I did a lot of my work in person too. So I think that the magic that happens in person is very special, but there is a good thing that can happen even in a blended environment. So hopefully we talk a little bit about that, all of us today.
Yeah, and blended, in terms like blended, maybe it's worth explaining that, because not everybody is familiar with these terms, just like we didn't know what social distancing was 6 months ago. I think in the future of work, there's all these terms like blended or hybrid, and these things get thrown out there. So maybe to start with one specific question that all three of you might like to just give a quick answer to, or people in the session. What kind of terms do you think are relevant that are fairly new terms that have come, let's say, in the last year or few years? So for me, one would be blended. I think it's been around for about a decade, but because I did my master's thesis on this, I know not a lot of people know what it is. I'm curious, Bernice and Thom, do you know what blended means?
Yes, I've actually been familiar with it as well, like you said. But I work now as an inclusion strategist and a team performance coach. But in my previous life, I was a digital strategist. So for me, I'm not your typical, maybe typical person who does this type of work. So I worked at my first startup in 2000, I think. Yeah, in 2000. So at the fairly beginning, when the internet was a new thing, I had my first job in a startup. So maybe I'm not the most typical person to ask that question.
That's good, but it's good to hear from everybody. And so you've heard of blended.
Yes.
I'm curious, those in the session, do you know what blended means when you use it? I use it in education as blended learning. Thom, have you heard of the term blended before?
I haven't heard about the term blended before.
So that's also, I think, an excellent point to make for the future of work, because things change so quickly. There's a lot of terms that we use. And also, I know in language, my Nederlands is redelijk goed. I can speak Dutch fairly well.
Very impressive.
I have dual nationality, actually. But when you're working in an international environment, we tend to use these terms like blended or hybrid and kind of assume that other people know what we're talking about. And often, my tips would be for the future of work is we have to, if not have a common language, go back a step and be very explicit sometimes about what we're trying to communicate and what we're trying to ask for or tell people. Mm-hmm. So for me, blended learning is a combination of online and offline. It started as learning, but it's also like life. Life is online and offline, right? So that's one term. Are there any other terms that people like unicorn, for example? I see Manuela is talking about yes to creating a business of value rather than unicorn. Manuela and I live about 10 minutes from each other in Delft and The Hague, and this is a good example of blended. We're going to try and catch up in person today, and it didn't quite work out, so we're on a screen again, but we'll catch up in person very soon. But unicorn, I don't know what a unicorn means. I know it's a tech company that gets big, but
I can speak to that, Renee. And my daughters would say unicorn is something quite different than, although I'm trying to teach them already. But
I think I like your daughter's definition.
I think me too, Renee. I think so. Unicorn is really a company that. I mean, it's it's funny because the name itself says it's like something that's not actually real, but it's a company that's just one of these like Facebook or these companies that just explodes and has like a 100 times multiplier for its investors and has is a multi-billion-dollar company. And I think that in the last 7 to 10 years, the way that sort of the startup world has gone, and it's really internationally, but it's particularly in the U.S. and Silicon Valley, which is I think is the heartbeat of a lot of the startup, sort of nomenclature and sort of the genesis. It's been about really just trying to find that the biggest one, the one can pop and have the biggest outcomes from a monetary standpoint and from a user like numbers standpoint. So unicorn kind of denotes that. There's been a lot of writing recently about zebras, which are more like companies that actually want to have profit. I agree when I think the terminology, and I'm sorry, I always raise my hand and say I inadvertently sometimes throw these terms out. It's just sort of natural. But to speak to that, what I realized is early on, even 6-7 years ago, we were using terminology which seems to do like online learning communities, community learning platform, and people were like, "What is that?" And we went
like sorry, I was going to say people like abbreviating too, and I see Dawn has saying chat here that a US educator perspective, blended was all the rage even before COVID, and I agree. But Thom.
Yeah. Yeah, just to add to this conversation, isn't this something which is already happening for like years and years? People use all these kind of business terms that make them feel cool or something. Like Scrum learning is something that you hear from the last year. So there's all these hype terms. AI is used in any way, not even in the most proper way sometimes. This is just a business way of using language, I think. And I think also the future of work, I think we can change that. I see that happen with a lot of companies nowadays who are using just the jargon or the business talk of what human beings just use. Like instead of communicating in all these difficult kind of hype terms. You can also just use the terms or the words that any kind of person would understand, just in order to make sense to everybody. And we have a couple of good examples here in the Netherlands. For instance, Coolblue, which is one of the biggest e-commerce web shops for electronic products. They are really good at just communicating in a way that everybody understands, instead of using this business language. And I would say the future of work is using more normal language, and also what we know from business a couple of years ago. Everybody used to wear a suit and used to wear a business outform, or
uniform,
business uniform. Sorry, Thank you, Renee. And I think this is also changing. Like, why do you want to have a business yourself and a personal yourself? I think this is going to change in the near future, and especially within these co-working spaces, you see this changing more and more.
And if I may add to that as well, the really checking if you're making sense to another person is also a big topic, totally within in creating an inclusive workspace, not only when using like difficult terms or acronyms or whatever, but we always think that just because we're speaking that we're communicating, which is totally not the case, because you have no idea how what you're saying is perceived by the other person, and just checking and making sure that someone is actually understanding what you're saying. And as to the point that you're making is very, very important. And I think the future of work is also really understanding and becoming better communicators, and also being aware of your own biases, in that you might have your own lens, cultural lens, that you see the world through, and you have to check your own assumptions. So not only for these difficult business terms, but only in normal conversations, I would like to suggest that people check their assumptions and make sure that you're having a real dialogue instead of a discussion, and making sure that you're on the same level, so to speak.
And I think we can take a lesson from the Dutch here. I've lived here long term and I have dual nationality now, but the Dutch are known as very direct worldwide. And even though it can come across sometimes as a little shocking sometimes to foreigners, you do get used to it. It comes with good intentions. So I think the Dutch, if you're looking at the future of work, one of the things I like to do is look backward. And the Dutch have, sorry, my sound is going a little strange. I'll just pause for a minute. Yeah. So the Dutch have always been very good at globalization, internationalization. So in the golden age, I mean, there's a lot of debate as to the pros and cons and, ethics of that. But one thing that has come out of it that influences the future of work is the globalization and engaging and interacting with other cultures. And something the Dutch have learned to do is communicate with lots of different cultures and clarify what is meant and say what you mean. Whereas in Australia, and I know in America, and I am currently teaching a class of 16 students from 13 different countries, ranging from China to Thailand to Ghana to Tanzania. I've got a lot of different nationalities. We have to be clear about what we're saying, what we want. And in the workplace of the future, I'm curious to see if you all agree. Do you see it continuing to be a global practice of working, like being in workplaces that are connected with the whole world? Would you all think so?
I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious about Jeremy's perspective on this. Probably, Jeremy, you will have customers all around the globe, don't you?
Yeah, and yes, I'll tag up on that really quickly. I mean, so we've been a distributed team since day one. We actually have 2 folks in the Netherlands, people in the United States, and clients all over the world for sure. And I think obviously having a technology company helps to do that. But I do think that there has been a paradigm shift since COVID happened that was already sort of on the come, that was already sort of happening, which is, this idea and this notion that you have to look. I think going to, I do miss. I was at a co-working space, Thom, right before COVID, and I kind of stopped going and set up an office in my bedroom, and my daughter would walk in, and we've all seen the dogs and the different. It's been really cool, actually. I think it's fantastic. But I also think
I have bunnies. I actually have bunnies in.
Oh, you'll have to show us that. That's amazing. I mean, I love it because I've been going on, to Tom's earlier point, I've been on meetings and t-shirts because, I think that's sort of like expected for, startup founders. Like, it's okay to wear a t-shirt to a meeting. If I have a finance call, maybe I'll wear, button down or a tie. But I do think, Tom, to your point, yes, Renée, also to your sort of prompt, I do think that there's a globalization that is happening. And I think it's really fascinating and awesome in terms of the future of work because it enables you to look at talent, to really get diverse perspectives from a variety of people. I had a business development call with an organization in London, and I totally botched it because, my energy and my way of being in the United States is so much different than what they just wanted to get to the, kind of like, what do you have? And I was sort of more, I have a softer person, not to say they're not personable people, but the first thing they wanted to know was like the table stakes and, what is it that you offer? And so I love that. I love learning. I've always been a traveler. I've spent time throughout the world, and I've been fortunate and privileged to be able to do that. And what's exciting for us is that we're bringing in client partners that are doing work also throughout the world. Our goal is to reach with impact through our clients at least 1% of the population. We have clients, Bernice, that are doing work with inclusivity and diversity and all social emotional learning, mindfulness, all these beautiful things that can help others. And I think that's really powerful. I did see some comments I don't want to miss out on to the jargon conversation. I just want to quick 2 seconds point out that I think that clear communication, to everyone's point, is so important. However, sometimes words like blended or hybrid are great for defining a certain modality that is important. So it's kind of like intentionality, right? And so being clear, I see people saying knowing who your audience is and being really clear. Sometimes things like AI are just like trendy words, Tom, right? That they lose their meaning. But I actually do think the word blended is accurate. That's the way of describing a combination of ways of learning, for instance. So I just wanted to tag up on that as well.
Oh, good. And I think I've been also scrolling the comments, and Pamela says globalization is here to stay. Why do people think it can be any other way? I'd answer that from 2 perspectives. One is I work and live in a global environment, and most of us, I think, today on this call do. So for us, it's kind of normal. But I've mixed enough with mostly country or older people who still don't think that way. So it's interesting and in fact, crucial to still realize that some people don't see it that way. Even if it's normal for us, it might not be normal for everybody. And secondly, because when we talk about the future, often we're looking for new trends and new things but I think it's worthwhile pausing. And even though globalization has been around for decades, it's still something that will affect the future and that we still need to learn about and identify and make part of the conversation. So that would be my take on that. And Dawn makes an interesting comment as well about the language, because I grew up speaking English in Australia. It's all I spoke until I came to the Netherlands. Then I had compulsory Dutch classes, and I'm like, I'll have this down in 3 months. And like 12 years later, I'm still working on it. And of course, there's billions of people in the world that speak other languages. It's not just English.
No.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
So do you think?
And if I could may say something about globalization as well. And of course, we are all in the bubble that we all think it's great and fantastic and we learn from each other. But I think, to speak to your point, that there are lots of people who are still who view that differently, but there are also a lot of people who are fearful of that because if the world is becoming bigger and they don't understand and they feel that they cannot participate, I think that's a big reason behind it why in so many countries and in the Netherlands as well, that political parties that really trade on that fear or make that fear bigger for their own political gain. We need to be aware that not for everybody it feels safe that the world is becoming bigger. And that's also part of the conversation I think we need to have. And people are afraid of maybe losing their jobs because everything can be done online. And maybe some people in another country can do it for less money than they are being paid. So I think fear is also a big thing of future of work that we don't need to get out of sight of.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to come back to Pamela's also adding to the conversation, not trying to correct globalization. been with us, and I completely agree. Even the people that think that they're not interested in globalization are affected in other ways. But it's definitely a factor that remains part of the conversation about the future of work. It's a big influence, and I think it needs to be part of the conversation. And with globalization comes culture, comes language, and all those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, unpacking globalization. Oh, sorry, Renee. Unpacking globalization is like as big a topic in and of itself as the future of work. So it's kind of, I would think of a microcosm of that, and then Bernice brings up a whole other great point, and you're like, oh yeah, that's true too. So it's complex, really. That's some of the benefits you might experience from your own purview are different than someone else. We deal with rural areas too, and trying to give proxy for or opportunities for folks in rural areas that are disconnected to have connection. And a big push is happening in the US in education to provide Wi-Fi for young people that don't have, that are in areas that have poverty or that are disconnected in rural areas. So, there's so many layers to that onion. That is what I would say to the comments and to what we're talking about, is that there's not just one sort of look on that or one perspective, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to scroll back up here. Sorry, you wanted to add something, Thom?
Yeah, so what I see as a trend for the future of work, to get back to the topic a bit, if you see this globalization, if you look at the younger adults, I would say, there's also people that are more focused on sustainability, and in that sense, globalization is not necessarily a good thing. And you see this trend growing and growing, and especially within our co-working spaces. When I started this company, I would say probably 5% of the people were talking about sustainability and doing good. And nowadays, we have 700 customers in our 3 co-working space locations. And I think nowadays, I would say 50% of the companies at least is dealing with this sustainability part, and this is growing and growing. So globalization is not only something positive. There's a negative side on that as well. So it's good that the future of work focuses on that as well, more and more, I would say.
Yeah, and you make a good point that the future of work will also be the next generation coming through, because I have daughters who are 11 and 13 years old. I think you mentioned you had children, Jeremy. I don't know what ages.
Yeah, younger, 5 and 18 months. Yeah,
but
2 girls.
Yeah. And I teach younger people as well. But for example, when you look at things like TikTok, or you look at the way that they're learning at school, the attention span is one point, and maybe work for the future of work, working hours. Let's come back to that, because I don't think that's such a bad thing. I mean, at some point, somebody decided that the working day was Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. And what I've always, 5 p.m., 5 a.m. it feels like sometimes. As a mother trying to juggle work when I first had children, I used to get so frustrated with, and still do, seeing job advertisements for full-time. Now, full-time, how long has full-time been around for? And why do we still advertise? If you go to LinkedIn jobs, nearly all of them are advertising full-time, and full-time is a 36 to 40 hour working week. I would like your thoughts on that. What about the working hours and the fact, do you think that having a full-time job or a part-time job will become part of the changes that are coming? Bernice, would you like to start with thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, in my work, I come across a lot of millennials who definitely want a different balance in their life. They want a full career, but they also want time to do their other activities and their hobbies, and have time for their friends and their families. So most definitely that will change in the future. But also coming back to that, the blended working, for me, I work sometimes in the morning, then in the afternoon I do other stuff, and then I work in the evening again. Sometimes I don't work a day during the week, but I will work on a Sunday. And I think that will be much easier in the future to figure out your own rhythm, so to speak. And you will have your meetings in different time zones, maybe. So it will be spread out through the week, which I think is a nice way of living. Other people might say, well, you know what? I would just want my 9 to 5, and after 5, I just want to turn my brain off and I'm on my own time. But I think there will be much more opportunities to figure out what your preferred rhythm is, and and you will have the tools to really create that balance in your life the way that you wanted to.
No, good. And Jenny,
Cool vision, Bernice.
Jenny added in a comment that as an image consultant, I see a huge shift in business dressing already before COVID, and now the last walls have broken. I think the change is better for everyone. So yeah, dressing, the regular hours. Do you want to talk about the hours, Thom? I'm curious, what times are your co-working spaces open? Because having a physical location, I guess you're limited as well in staffing it. So how do you tackle the work times?
Yeah, so all our 3 co-working space locations are open 24/7.
Oh wow!
And the reason for that is that we have a lot of nationalities working in all our locations. So we have people working in different time zones. We have poker players playing poker here all night. We have professional gamers. We have people that just want to work from lunchtime until 12 in the evening. So people really pick their own working schedule, and I completely agree with what Bernice says. The only question I have with that is every boss ready for personalized working schedules? We also have our reception times, for instance. We want to have the reception from 9 to 5. So our full-timers need to be there at 9 to 5, and I can't. Well, we can have more staff and make them all work part-time. So not every company would be suitable for personalized working schedules. But if this would be the future of work, I would definitely want to work until my 80th year in this life. That would be awesome.
And Jeremy, for you, 7:40 a.m. now. You're working before I usually have breakfast, so you can certainly talk about flexible working hours.
Absolutely. I mean, not my typical day in terms of getting into a rhythm, per Bernice's point, but this has been a topic of conversation recently with my team. I'm more in different time zones, which is so interesting in terms of scheduling things sometimes. But look, I'm a huge fan, and I've had discussions as some of our team has sort of been contract workers for years, and now they're slowly adding on to what would be like a full-time sort of position. And what the discussion has been, and as a leader of our team, I think what's important to me is that it's not sort of like a butts in seats mentality where you have to be there at certain times. I mean, clearly, if you have a meeting, you need to kind of follow through and things of that nature. But the most important thing is that you have that energy, that passion, that commitment, that you can get things done in the time that's necessary for you. One discussion I had with my director of finance recently was around an organization called Holacracy in the US that looks at the workplace and how people dedicate their energy to work. And they base pay and equity based on the percentage of time that you put in of your total work time. So if it's 100% of your energy, even if that's 10 hours a week versus 100 hours a week, that's how you get paid, which is really interesting. I think that could also be challenging, but I do think the future of work has different ways. For us, I think full-time is not going to be your 40 hours a week, honestly. I think it's going to be more like 30 for some, and they're going to get a ton done, but they're going to have that. If they only want to work 40 hours in a week total, let's say, they have their other 10 hours to do things they want to do. That I think then brings different creative streams and energy into their work with Dreams You Do. So for me, that is so valuable that I don't want to put stringent restrictions on those kind of things. And I think larger companies now in the US in particular, but in general, I would imagine, I'm curious, in the Netherlands, are saying, hey, remote work is great. Like, there's been studies that have been done where if you done properly, if you give people the choice, some folks will go in person, but some want to stay home. I think it's more about choice and agency to make decisions about your time. And because we all have different ways and rhythms of working. So that's how I would comment on that.
Good. And that links to the topic Thom was talking about sustainability. More and more people are interested in and finding ways to work sustainably, I think, and part of that is the number of hours you work a week. There's a saying, let's see if I can remember it off the top of my head, that we work to buy things that we don't need to impress people that we don't like. And I think that's changing, like the amount of stuff that we need and the amount of things that we need to buy with our money. So for me, for example, I work 50%. And I really thought, I'm now a single mother, and I thought that I would need to work 40 hours a week to support my children. But I've learned that I can live okay on less than a 40-hour week, spend time with my kids. And I can't afford as much stuff as I thought I needed, but you figure out you don't need it all anyway. So with working, you might not need to earn as much as you think you do if you really sit down and budget and think about what you need to spend your money on. I just want to make
Renée,
sure.
can I say one more quick thing to Thom's point? Sorry about that topic. I think that the key is we're a small company, right? So the key is that the larger companies that employ thousands of people start to take on this mentality that they have such a, it's the sort of that leaving the top down approach, the heavy-handed approach, that the restrictive approach that makes people so unhappy. And there's been studies done where 70% of people are disgruntled and unhappy with their job. That's not really conducive to a proper work environment, to good morale, to good outputs, honestly, and ROI. So to Thom's point, it's about it's not just about the smaller companies and the people that sort of are, have vision already or ahead of the curve. It's unlocking this potential in larger companies that employ large amounts of people, that they reevaluate what the bottom line can look like for the health and the well-being of their staff, honestly, is what I think is going to be really important.
Good point about the well-being. And I watched the plenary talks yesterday for the kickoff of this conference. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name. Enzo, Y-N-Z-O, Choco Evangelist from Tony's Chocolonely. I love listening to him about how they provide a great workplace, as well as Daniel Roy from INFI. And they were talking a lot about trust. So I think I've seen that in my career. I'm 45 now, and I started working at about 18. I think more and more employers are trusting their staff to do what needs to be done instead of the kind of authoritative micromanaging. And again, it depends on culture. I'm trying to talk, listen to you, and read the input on the side here.
Multitasking.
So to those of you listening, my apologies if we're skipping some of your questions. I'm trying really hard to keep an eye on them, and I'm just scrolling back to make sure we don't miss things.
Campbell had a great question there about bicultural identity. Anyway.
Yes. Chemo had a very... Hi, Chemo.
Let's just quickly summarize the questions and then to make sure we cover them. So Renko asked about 5G. I want to make sure we have a quick chat on that.
Yeah. And I saw a question from Chemo about bicultural identity in the workplace.
And I'm just scrolling down. Have we got any more questions? There's a couple of great comments. Okay, so with the 5G, I know very little about 5G. From my understanding, I know there's a lot of resistors to it, but I don't yet actually know what they're because I've had so much to process in the last year or so. Going through a lot of personal things. Like I broke my ankle, I herniated a disc in my back. So that affects your work and ability to work as well. So there's a lot of things beyond COVID that happen to individuals. So 5G, what is your take on it and what innovations do you see regarding the future of work? Anyone know about what's happening and how to respond to that?
I'm not a big expert on it as well, so.
I can relate a bit. So there are a lot of technical teams in co-working spaces who just want the fastest of the fastest internet as possible. So 5G is also a topic that we discuss in here. It's only better than 4G, and from what we know now, personally harming any person other than 4G or 3G that we had before. It's just a new generation of internet that we are using. Innovating also the infrastructure that all this information, that's why it's possible that we are having this entire conference online. So stuff like 5G is good for the future of work, I would say. And another innovation that I think is very important for the future of work and is going to change a lot is it's a hype term again. It's artificial intelligence. We mentioned it earlier. This is actually every human being can work. We use our hands to work, or we use our brains to work. Artificial intelligence is computers taking over these human activities in order to do it automatically. And there are a lot of companies within our co-working environment that are focusing on this artificial intelligence. Sorry for the buzzword. But this is really going to change the way we work in the near future. So we already see like autonomous driving cars. We have a company in here that's dealing with autonomous floating boats. Just automated chatbots, for instance. I think in the future we can customer service, we can completely do it via chatbots instead of people having to pick up the phone in order to answer constantly the same question. So I think artificial intelligence is an innovation that we're going to see and hear a lot from in the near future.
Yeah, I was just going to say, having AI in my house, I've got a Google and Alexa I've been experimenting with, and Siri. So, but it's still in its early stages when you talk
Siri's always picking up on me whenever I say serious, and she's like, we have a love-hate relationship. I want to quickly chime in on the 5G. A couple quick things. They keep claiming 5G is going to happen in the US, and it's not. 1. 2, it is actually about interconnectivity of devices. So I think the scary thing for me, and Thom, I'll speak to AI at the same time, or artificial intelligence. I work in technology. we're not using a lot of machine learning or artificial intelligence right now in our technology. I'll push back a little bit on Thom's point from my perspective, in the sense that I do agree that artificial intelligence is super powerful. My feeling is that humans still always need to be a part of it. Just so Terminator doesn't happen. If you know the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, I don't want to see that happen, where the droids take over. But furthermore, the interconnectivity devices is that, like, literally, like your dishwasher's gonna be talking to your refrigerator saying, hey, like the clothes got dirty because of the food you got, so don't get that food. I mean, that's what 5G enables, and that's what all the big companies are talking about. I think it's really powerful in some use cases in medicine, certain things that can immediately have responsiveness. So 5G is still early stages, but it's a whole other level of interconnectivity of devices. That, in conjunction, though, with artificial intelligence, means that humans in the future of work are being replaced, and that's always been the fear, people losing jobs. And I think, again, I have a bias, but like, removing humans from the equation, to me, is a disservice in many aspects to the world. And I'm a technologist, so it's the balance, guys. Like, it's the yes, AI can be powerful, but like, where is it that we still need a human? If there's a chat bot and they're answering a lot of questions, at a certain point, I want to talk to a human. I mean, I always want to talk to a human, but like, so I think that there's this balance in the future of work that we need to see with technology.
And also at this point still, we don't need to forget that the chatbots and the algorithms are being programmed by humans, right? So a lot of the conversations in AI are also about the biases that are being programmed into the algorithms. And it's not because people are biased, but there's just, in data science, people don't think about what kind of outcome they're really after, and they're not viewing the data in a very neutral, kind of unbiased way. So I think that element of balance that we need to make sure that the way that we are programming all these tools and innovations and chatbots and all those stuff, it's being done by humans, and humans are not perfect. So we do not need to assume that then the end result will be perfect, right?
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing point. I totally agree. There was a study done around, or recently came out, that there was a hiring bot that was created that was super chauvinistic. It was terrible. I mean, just like, really. Because if you're not including different voices, and even if your intention is this is going to be great, it's like it was racist, it was chauvinist, it was just and so it's you got to be really careful with that stuff. I agree, Bernice, that's a beautiful point.
Yeah, I'm watching all of the comments coming in. We have like 8 minutes left in the hour, and I want to finish.
Oh my God, already!
So that people can move across to the plenary talk that starts at 2. I wanted to just give them a couple of minutes to log into that. So I'm going to have to wrap it up. Yeah.
Can I just speak a little point at the one point that Timo made, because I thought that was so interesting about the bicultural identity in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I think especially we are so international, especially in this bubble that are the people within who are joining this conference. And What I see happening is that people are, especially young people, the millennials, they know that they have different roots, they know they have different backgrounds, and they're proud of their different backgrounds, and they bring that perspective to the workplace. So when talking about the future of work, I think we will see a much more authentic, diverse perspective being brought. And what that needs is that we are able to really welcome all those different perspectives. And that, for instance, in the Netherlands, I'm very happy to hear, Renee, that you're proud of the Dutch because we're so global. But in the workplace, there's also a lot of room for improvement, so to speak, about really welcoming those perspectives when it's not typically Dutch, so to speak. So I think the future of work will be not only international, but even within, for instance, everybody with a Dutch nationality, there's so many people with different backgrounds and different roots that they bring that perspective to the workplace, and that will happen all over the place in other countries as well. And I think that's very important to welcome those perspectives.
Absolutely. And I'm watching Christina's come in with a few great questions we're just not going to get time to answer, but I'd love to continue the conversation. I think we have, with the four of us and all of you participating, thank you very much for joining us in the chats as well. I think in just under an hour, we have addressed a massive, broad topic. And I hope we get the chance to listen back, actually, because there's a lot of things I've been trying to make notes and read and talk and listen all at the same time. But I'd like to just do a quick summary. So at the beginning, before I met all of you here online and had the chance to chat to you about this topic, I was saying that when I read Jeremy's bio, I was like education and lifelong learning came across strongly. With Thom's about location and bringing together community physically, but also online. With Bernice about the diversity and distribution, and for myself, the connection and communication. So we've covered those 8 words plus a lot more. So I'd like to sum up with all of you listening in. Could you just put one sentence, preferably one word, but that might be pushing it, just one sentence about what trends do you think we need to really be aware of for the future of work? It may be something we've talked about already, but what's one thing that's really stays in your mind about what do we need to know about to prepare for the future of work? I think beyond those 8 things, for me, it's about flexibility. We need to be flexible. There's so much change. There's so much diversity. There's so much, we have to be flexible. We can't just be rigid. Thom and Bernice and Jeremy, did you want to wrap up with one word or one sentence about the future of work?
I have to. I have growth. I have growth mindset, and that ties in. And that ties into the willingness to learn, the willingness to discover new things, the willingness to stay in conversations that with people that you might not share a background with. Just have a growth mindset.
A growth mindset. Great one. Thank you, Bernice. Thom, do you have a word or a sentence to wrap up today?
Yeah, I think remote working will be the buzzword for the upcoming years. Remote working while sharing knowledge and different backgrounds. And the future of work is going to be so much fun since people will potentially work less hours a week and still have more. I think this is great for all of us.
Thank you. And Jeremy?
Yeah, I always kind of go back to things, a couple quick phrases: value-centered, heart-centered, kind of, coming at work with a perspective of love in what you do, both for the work that you do, the people that you can impact. So I think I always look for the best in humanity in terms of how we approach work. However that shapes is really important. Moving from only a profit-oriented mentality, which kind of kicked off heavily, I think, in the 80s and has gotten a lot heavier since then, to more of a heart-centered, value-centered approach. And I've heard all of that today with everyone on the panel, which is fantastic. It doesn't surprise me, but it's so cool to hear.
Really enjoyed interacting with you. If it's okay with you, I'd like to take a quick screenshot and continue the conversation over on LinkedIn. Is that okay? Can we have a smile? Yeah,
yes, please.
Good. And I'd like to invite anyone in the session, if you'd like to continue the conversation,
Cheers.
Please feel free, either on this platform or after the conference. I love to hear from people on LinkedIn. Thank you, Thom and Bernice and Jeremy. I could continue this for much longer, but I've also got a lot out of the last hour. A lot of things to think about. Thank you to those of you who joined us. Our apologies if we didn't get to all of the questions, but great to see that stimulating the thinking, and please continue the conversation. Have a great afternoon. And
thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Renee. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And the plenary session now over at 2:00, and then a wrap up for the end of the day. So please head over to that if you can. Thank you.
Take care. Cheers.
Thank
Good
you.
to meet y'all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.